1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, test salle 17 pour le webcast, test salle 17 pour le webcast. Si tout va bien, je passe à 6 langues. Anglais, 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 anglais. Test pour salle 17. Anglais, anglais. Test pour salle 17. Test pour salle 17. Anglais. Et je passe à français. Français. Anglais, anglais. Anglais, 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 test, 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 anglais, 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 test pour salle 17, anglais, 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 et je passe en français. Un, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, Elma, Flore, Flore, salle 17, Flore, tu m'entends? Ça arrive. Anglais, 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 anglais. Test, salle 17, anglais. Je fais français.
And the mic is on. Okay. Excellencies, distinguished representatives, good morning. I'm Seo Chang-rok, Chair of the Human Rights Committee. On behalf of the Human Rights Committee, I would like to welcome you to meeting number 4249 of the Human Rights Committee. This is public meeting and on webcast. Thank you for joining us today and for your continued engagement with the treaty body system in these exceptionally challenging times. We have convened this emergency meeting to discuss a single urgent issue: the financial challenges of UN and the future of the Human Rights Committee. We come before you today with a profound sense of urgency. Let me begin by stating that all members of the Human Rights Committee are deeply honored to take enormous responsibility for monitoring the implementation of the Covenant. We take this duty very seriously. But today, our ability to fulfill this mandate is under serious threat. The austerity measures imposed on us jeopardize not just our current work, but the very future of the committee itself. As outlined in the letter I shared with you earlier this week, these are truly unprecedented times for the committee and for entire treaty body system. Our most pressing concern is the cancellation of our third session this year, scheduled for October and November, as announced by ICCPR. This is the first time in our 50-year history that such a cancellation has occurred. This cancellation puts us in a very difficult position. Our rules of procedure require us to meet 3 times a year. This is not just a tradition, it is a fundamental obligation under our mandate, and indispensable to the effectiveness of our work. If we lose a session, nearly 8 months will pass without a single meeting in Geneva. This means serious delays in reviewing state party reports and in deciding on individual complaints of covenant violations. Many victims have already waited years for justice. Now they will wait even longer. Every delay weakens our recommendations, diminishes our impact, and undermines the ability to prevent further violations. We recognize that the UN's financial crisis is very serious. And we know that the Secretariat is doing its best under current constraints. But it is clear that the rules and structures of our system are too rigid to cope with situations like this. For example, in early June, during the treaty body chairs meeting, when we were informed that third sessions of treaty bodies would be cancelled, several chairs, myself included, explored the possibility of mobilizing emergency funding to hold our fall sessions. However, we were told that this is not possible, as treaty bodies are required to rely exclusively on regular budgets to carry out their mandated activities. We understand that this rule is intended to safeguard our independence. But it makes little sense if, in practice, it prevents us from functioning at all when the regular budget falls short. The Covenant clearly obliges the Secretary General to ensure that the committee can carry out its work. If current approach blocks fulfillment of that obligation, then it must change. We therefore appeal to you, the state parties, to help us find a solution. This is why we are here today. Open and frank communication with the state parties is crucial because ultimately it is in your interest to ensure that the treaty bodies can continue their vital work even in difficult times. We need your political will, your financial commitment, and your concrete support, not only to help us find a way to hold our third session this year, but also to strengthen the system for the future. Let me remind you that our committee monitors the fundamental rights of individuals in 174 states parties as part of the approximately 1,400 treaty ratifications regularly reviewed by treaty bodies. This is a remarkable early warning and accountability system, one that you, the state parties, created and entrusted to us. We therefore urge you to ensure that the system can continue to function effectively. If not, I'm compelled to ask you, what alternative do you propose? We strongly caution against treating this one as a one-time problem. If we allow this unprecedented cancellation to become normalized, it will set a dangerous precedent. Each time the UN faces a funding shortfall, the credibility and effectiveness of treaty body system, which is a core pillar of UN human rights architecture, will erode further. At the same time, we must not lose sight of the growing global pushback against human rights, especially the very rights the committee is mandated to protect. This is not the moment to weaken UN human rights mechanisms. On the contrary, the world needs this remarkable early warning and accountability system now more than ever. In closing, let me be clear. We are asking you to do three things. First, support us, even at this late stage, in finding a solution to hold our third session this year and commit to holding all three regular sessions in 2026. Second, allow voluntary contributions from states to be used transparently and responsibly to support the committee's work, while fully preserving the independence and impartiality of the treaty bodies. Third, help the committee function effectively by fulfilling your reporting obligations, engaging with us in dialogue, and supporting our work financially and politically, both now and in the long run. Today's meeting is different from our usual formal sessions. We are gathered here to focus on single urgent matter. So without further formalities or additional reports on the committee's work, I propose that we move directly to discussion. I invite you to speak openly and frankly. Now I will open the floor. Who would you like to take the floor first? From Japan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Japan welcomes this opportunity for dialogue between state parties and the Human Rights Committee. We also would like to express our sincere appreciation for the ongoing dedication and efforts of the committee members. Your comprehensive explanation has reaffirmed the serious impact that the current liquidity crisis is having on the work of treaty bodies, including the Human Rights Committee. Japan is deeply concerned about the current situation. We recognize that this financial crisis is not only affecting treaty bodies, but also significantly impacting the activities of the special procedures and the implementation of mandates established by the Human Rights Council. We believe that the implication of the liquidity crisis must be addressed from the broader perspective, and that a comprehensive response is essential. While exploring new funding possibilities, we must also not lose sight of the need for all stakeholders, including member states, OHCHR, and others, to pursue efficiency and rationalization. Japan remains committed to supporting the important work of the Human Rights Committee. Once again, we express our gratitude for the opportunity to engage in today's dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will give the floor to representative from Spain.
Muchas gracias, señor.
Thank you very much, Chairman. And thank you also for providing us this opportunity for an exchange of views in a more open, informal format with members of the committee. I've listened to your statement carefully, and I'd like to say that we share the concern you have, as well as the worries and concerns conveyed. We maintain firm commitment to the treaty bodies. We believe that this is a cornerstone of the international human rights system. These are bodies which are vital to guide states to implement their obligations, given that the full realization of human rights, as I had an opportunity to say in our recent meeting with members of the committee, is ongoing and work that has not yet been completed. Chairman, you have asked three things of us: expression of political will, firstly, and secondly, financial commitment, and thirdly, specific support. As the expression of political support, we would like to fully support the treaty body system as a fundamental backbone in guaranteeing the human rights of the citizens across the world. As to the financial commitment, I would like to point out that my country, Spain, has increased its contributions to the system. We are paying on time what we due as regards our ordinary budgetary contributions, and we have increased our voluntary contributions. In addition to that, we have also increased the amount of unearmarked contributions to the OHCHR. We've taken note of your request, in other words, that the voluntary contributions could be allocated to financing the activities of the committees. We believe that if there's no legal barrier from doing so, this is a request that warrants consideration. Part of our voluntary contributions, in fact, are going to strengthen the capacity of the Secretariat, which underpins the functioning of all treaty bodies, and we are going to pursue this path in enhancing and increasing our contributions. We're very much concerned about the consequences of cancelling the third session in September of the treaty bodies, and we convey this message in the joint meeting of the chairs of treaty bodies recently held. We believe that the current situation requires structural responses which are sustainable and sustainable in the long term, above and beyond providing provisional solutions. That is why we are following very closely the UN 80 process launched by the Secretary General. In Madrid last year, as you know, we also held the meeting of the chairs of committees. In this context, we would like to continue to encourage this committee in its work to persevere in terms of harmonizing the working methods amongst the various committees. From the utmost respect for the autonomy of each committee, we believe that We need to contribute and continue to harmonize the working methods. And we would like to know your opinion about the state of play of this discussion with your counterparts in the current context. The specific case of the Human Rights Committee is of concern to us, given the backlog in processing individual communications, which are over 1,000 now. Session after session, you have been warning us about this accumulated backlog. In previous meetings, we have made proposals such as the adoption of a type of simplified procedure to process communications which contain joint elements. And we'd like to know what the committee's assessment is about any possible additional measures to be adopted in order to provide a solution to those outstanding cases. Because at all costs, we want to avoid that the lack of resolution of these cases would jeopardize trust placed in the system amongst those who seek asylum in the committee as a last resort to obtain reparation measures. Lastly, I would underscore one important point, and that is we want to highlight the fact that multilingualism must continue to be an essential and irrenounceable value in the work of this committee as well as in the other treaty bodies of the United Nations. Multilingualism should not be sacrificed because of budgetary austerity, because this is key to achieve inclusive and effective participation. So we would encourage you, Chairman, at this difficult juncture and with the political will that you'd have from states to come up with new, specific, audacious and transformative solutions. We would encourage you to seek these solutions. Spain's commitment to multilateralism is still intact, and we are focused on contributing to taking measures which would respond to the pressing needs of this time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your proposals and encouragement and your questions. And your questions will be answered later in the meeting. Now I'd like to invite a representative for Serbia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The United Nations human rights system, including the Human Rights Council and the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, is facing a severe liquidity crisis with, as we can hear even today, far-reaching consequences. As we have been recently informed, the Office of the High Commissioner for the second consecutive year will not be able to deliver all the activities mandated by the Council in full and on time. Some of the activities mandated even for 2026 will be equally affected. The budget cuts have significantly impacted UN special procedures, limiting country visits and cancelling important meetings. Treaty bodies are also feeling the strain, with potential session cancellations, which would lead to crucial delays in assessing compliance with human rights treaties and excessively large backlogs. We understand the challenges facing the UN system, which inevitably affect the important work of the committee. We deeply share concern about the implications of this crisis on human rights work. As a member of the United Nations and a party to the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the Republic of Serbia is deeply troubled by the ongoing delays in resolving individual communications, some of which have been pending before this committee for nearly a decade. Furthermore, we are dismayed to learn that the committee session scheduled for October-November this year will be cancelled, which will strongly affect the work of the committee and will only increase the already significant backlog of cases. This situation further raises serious concern for trust in the system and about respect for the right to a fair trial within reasonable time, as the cornerstone of human rights to ensure justice protects human dignity and upholds the rule of law. In conclusion, the Republic of Serbia is ready to engage constructively in further activities and dialogue to overcome this very disturbing situation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will invite the representative from Egypt.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, dear colleagues, my delegation would like to express its sincere appreciations for the Human Rights Committee and its efforts in monitoring and implementation of the Covenant and advancing the civil and political rights. We value the legal expertise and the important role its members play in shaping international human rights jurisprudence. I would like to reaffirm our strong support for the committee's mandate and also recognize the significant contributions its members make to the development of international human rights law. We take particular pride in the long-standing engagement of Egyptian experts in the committees, most recently through the valued participation of Ambassador Basim. Egypt is deeply concerned by the unprecedented cancellation of the committee's third session in 2025. This risks undermining its ability to carry out the core functions under the Covenant. While we recognize that the UN financial system is under pressure, there are a lot of financial constraints nowadays. We stress the need for innovative, cost-effective solutions that uphold the treaty bodies. This has been one of the tenets of our position, is that we need innovative and cost-effective solutions to uphold the treaty body's integrity and ensure the continued delivery of their essential mandates. We also highlighted the importance of greater coordination among treaty bodies to ensure consistent and coherent concluding observation, supportive, more effective national implementation. These efforts must align with the ongoing UN80 initiative, where reinforcing and sustainably supporting the treaty body system should be a core priority. The credibility and efficiency are critical to upholding the Covenant's commitment. Today also, I would like to reaffirm our strong support for the Human Rights Committee and stands ready to work with all partners to safeguard its functions and advance lasting and meaningful reform. With regards to the proposals, Mr. Chair, that you put forward, I think that it is worth exploring what you had highlighted about the voluntary contributions. And I think that this is an idea worth exploring, provided that there are no legal barriers. We should ensure that there are no legal barriers that are in place that we are not aware of. But if it is, I mean, it needs to be a little bit explored and studied to be able to, for us to comprehend. We haven't had the time yet, but it's an idea that's worth exploring. We haven't had the time to dig into it, but we have to explore whether there are legal barriers and also how you are going to ensure the independence and the impartiality. This is ideas I think that we need to explore, and we're ready and we're open to such ideas to see it from all the sides. But I commend your effort in trying to find a solution, and I will stop here and thank you.
Thank you very much, particularly your positive response to my proposal. And we may be able to produce some proposal, but it's only the states who can make a decision. So as you said, I wish you continue to dig into it and make it possible. Appreciate it. And I'll invite the representative from Croatia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Thank you for organizing this meeting. We find that it's very useful to have direct dialogue and open dialogue with the members of the committee. We have to admit that actually we are facing unprecedented situations in multilateral system, primarily caused by the new financial reality and new financial situation in the whole system. While actually we support UN80 reform initiative, we are of the view that that should not have any impact to the efficiency of the treaty bodies and the whole human rights system, because treaty bodies are the core of the human rights system, and particularly Committee on Human Rights as a body that monitors implementation of the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights, one of the basic documents of the human rights system. And we really think that somehow some solutions should be found in order to complete this year with the third envisaged and already planned session in October and November. That is certainly will contribute to the solving of backlog of cases. We are aware of that. But without the third session, for sure, that backlog would not be solved or try to be solved without any doubt. We encourage actually at the same time coordination between different treaty bodies. We think that dialogue between treaty bodies and perhaps should find solution or strengthening the system of the working method system of the treating bodies, which also could contribute to the solving of backlogs. At the same time, finally, I would like to express our support and our readiness to be further engaged in dialogue with all our partners, with OHCHR as well, with treaty bodies to solve the current situation. And that for the moment, the most important is to solve situation until the end of 2025, and then further on within the dialogue, within the strengthening the whole system, we hope that the system could function efficiently as we all expect. Thank you very much again.
Thank you very much. How many? Okay, I will, there are 3 more representatives now. I'll give the floor to 3 of them, and maybe I will stop and I'll give the floor to our members so that we can have a more interactive dialogue. So now I give the floor to representative from Colombia.
Gracias, señor.
Thank you, sir. The Colombian state acknowledges the special importance of the treaty bodies and the important work to oversee compliance with states' obligations in the area of human rights. Given the high number of mandates that states have granted to the United Nations, we underscore the importance of maintaining their functioning uninterrupted. And in the specific case of the treaty bodies, we believe that it is vital that continuity be maintained during the sessions, including those planned to be held between October and November 2025. We hail the UN80 reform initiative and the initiative of the High Commissioner for Human Rights 2.0, as well as seeking solutions to tackle the major challenges that will be faced in the future in the field of human rights, climate change, and the effects of new technologies, as well as the possible impact of AI on fundamental freedoms of persons. We believe it vital that these initiatives do not affect the due functioning of the human rights treaty bodies. On the contrary, they must be there to give greater efficiency and effectiveness, which would tackle the new challenges that are thrown up globally, as well as financial expressions which have been emerging. I'd also like to suggest, Mr. Chairman, that the various stakeholders in the United Nations system, including the Human Rights Committee, think about the validity that in light of international human rights law, the decision may have of any of the members to suspend or withdraw suddenly their contributions to the functioning of the organization, both when it comes to compulsory contributions as well as voluntary ones. The United Nations system is based on the commitment of all its members to contribute to its functioning insofar as possible. But this is a serious commitment and in-depth commitment. And when one state has traditionally contributed to the functioning of the system, we should ask, what is it that has made it suspend overnight a contribution of this nature? The custom creates rights, and in international law, even more so. So I would appeal to reflect, particularly on the part of the committee which is specialized in these type of considerations. This is something that we would like to put forward. And we know that its impact in the short term won't be visible, but in the medium and long term, it can contribute to bringing about a significant change in international relations positively. In times of turbulence and attacks against multilateralism, states must unite in supporting the key international human rights bodies and strengthen them so as to tackle major social changes and major global challenges. The fight for the effective enjoyment of all human rights for all should be incessant and tireless. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much for your encouraging statement. I'll give the floor to Russian Federation representative.
Благодарю вас.
Thank you very much, Chair. At the outset, we'd like to add our voice to that of the previous speakers, and thank you for holding this briefing. Thank you for the information about the status quo in your department. We support the mandate of the Human Rights Council Committee. We consider the work being done on the review of UPRs of states being extremely important. We are convinced that the comments produced can be effective when there is a constructive direct dialogue with member states of the international covenant. We are deeply concerned by the financial crisis and the liquidity crisis of the UN, which has impacted not just your committee, but other treaty bodies also, and also other mechanisms within the UN system. We stand ready to work together to pool our resources to find new possible solutions to this problem. At the same time, we are convinced that all of the measures undertaken must be considered and executed within the framework of existing procedures and governance structures. We understand the logic of funding treaty bodies from the regular budget of the UN in order to ensure impartiality and objectivity. However, at the same time, there was a case when our delegation wanted to fund one of the mandates of the Human Rights Council bodies, and the High Commissioner for Human Rights Commission has stated on several occasions that such mandates are exclusively funded from the UN regular budget. And in our case, no exception was made. Therefore, we consider that if such a proposal is made and there is such an exception for treaty bodies, then it's necessary that the same approach is taken for all such cases. Also, if a proposal on funding the activity of the Human Rights Council is put forward for other treaty bodies, similar measures should also be adopted. As I already said, we stand ready to help find new solutions. It's very important at the same time for us to have a non-discriminatory and objective approach. In this connection, we would be grateful to hear comments from the Secretariat and representatives of the ICCPR to see what measures and procedures are planned for funding of treaty bodies and other mechanisms also, which at the current time are receiving funds from the UN regular budget, and what possibilities and mechanisms there might be for allocating voluntary contributions to fund activities by treaty bodies. I would also like to reiterate that in Resolution GA68, there is a line about the allocation of additional time for treaty bodies, including for resolving issues on debts over reviewing the UPRs of member states. With the exception of one treaty body, none has been able to resolve this problem of arrears, and so our delegation has the question of how the problem of allocation of additional time for treaty bodies was resolved. In our opinion, the situation where arrears is an issue that has not been resolved means that the allocation of additional time was not used appropriately or effectively. So we believe that it's necessary to find other ways to solve this problem. We consider that today's dialogue possibly could lead to some delegations or perhaps members of the committee offering constructive proposals which have legs, and then our delegation will be happy to work together with the ICCPR and delegations and members of the committee also to develop ways of executing such new ideas, with the caveat that we want to see a non-discriminatory, universal standard approach for all cases, and that we are working within the framework of existing governance structures and mechanisms. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your considerate statement. Now, at this moment, the last speaker is the representative for Costa Rica.
Thank you, Chairman. And I'd like to thank all committee members for convening us to this meeting. First and foremost, my delegation would like to endorse the words of the Ambassador Gayon of Colombia. Costa Rica is fully in line with what Ambassador Gayon has said and the importance and the concerns raised. I have a number of general considerations that I'd like to make. Firstly, and then afterwards, I'll go into the substance of the requests you made at the beginning of your introduction to this meeting. Firstly, I'd like to thank all of you for this open dialogue and the opportunity that we have this morning. It's always very welcome, particularly because I feel it important that we, the states, and you, the members of this committee, but all committees, are aware of the fact that we, the states, are the owners of this system. And I'm not saying this in terms of superiority over you, but rather you rely on us and we rely on you because our commitments are shared. That's an extremely new element in the system. I've been here for many years, and when we tried to refer to what the ambassador of Spain was saying in terms of harmonization, there was major resistance. There was total and absolute opposition to the states requesting members of the committees to harmonize their working methods. Now, all of this was based on independence, the specificity of each treaty body. And I believe that during all crises, there are opportunities, and I do want to be honest, as a state party, which is extremely committed. You must believe that we are very much committed to the treaty bodies. If the human rights pillar of the United Nations is important, the very backbone of that human rights pillar are the treaty bodies. Having said that, I think at this point in time, what we face is urgency, and the measures that we have to take are ones of mitigation measures. There is a process and a structural problem right now. What it needs is solutions to mitigate the effects and the protection gaps, particularly when it comes to communications in the Human Rights Committee. I think at a later stage, in structural terms, we will have to say how this changes. This will be part of the UN 80 negotiations, but at the present time, and as far as we're concerned, for the October-November session, what we need to do is to study and look at possibilities to mitigate the effects that a session would not take place. And this leads me on to a question, and I would like the Secretary to help me out here. I'd like to know whether the problem is one of liquidity or is it to do with the ordinary budget? In other words, there's no money in the ordinary budget, is that the case? Or is it a problem related to liquidity? Because then it would mean that the problem comes from last year and that the money wasn't budgeted in the 5th committee for this year. That's an entirely separate, different problem, and the approach would also be very different, because then we would know what other activities from the current budget we can cut, and we can do things like these ones, which are very important.
Y me perdona mi querido amigo.
Apologies to my dear friend, Ambassador Marcos of Spain, because I did speak in English, but that's part of multilingualism. I do believe that what's most important now is to maintain the issue of communications. And without removing protection from the states who are going to submit their reports at the next session. And as states, we have requested this of the committee. We have said, please, could you postpone the consideration of our report? Okay, let's postpone it. And the time then granted to the committee could be used to deal with communications. That's one possibility that I'm raising. You generously asked us to give you some ideas. So I'm really looking at what the possibilities are. This could be with a constructive dialogue with countries who are to submit and defend their reports in the next session. We could propose that, suggest that to them until we find a structural solution. But we need to deal with the most urgent, pressing problems in terms of urgency and mitigation, and that's working on communications. Now, the other topic that I would invite you to study is as follows. You could hold sessions by using new technologies. In other words, you don't necessarily, not all members necessarily have to come to Geneva for 4 weeks. To completely reduce this, the trips, let's say, the travel, for communications, you could hold virtual meetings or possibly completely reduce your travel on an exceptional basis. We're really here dealing with an emergency and mitigation situation of a specific case of the Human Rights Committee for its October-November session. I think those are the areas that we could look into further. And you could take those up and possibly decide on them. I think the urgent nature of the situation requires mitigation measures before undertaking structural work. Now, the structural work not only affects this committee, but of course, all treaty bodies. And that's where states have a very significant work to carry out. I'd like to thank you very much indeed for your attention. And Don Rodrigo Alberto was my great mentor. So I wouldn't be lying in saying that Costa Rica will always be committed to the treaty bodies. And otherwise, he knows where I live. He has my address. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your new ideas and your questions. Now, we will respond to the excellent questions proposed by the representatives of the states. and our members and secretariat will be answering. So maybe I'll give the floor to members. I'll give the floor to Madame Tigruza.
Excellence.
Your Excellencies, Chairman, thank you very much indeed. Thank you for having responded to this appeal. I think the discussion, and this has just been said, the discussion we're having today is a vital one, and you said that yourself, Ambassador. The states are the authors of the 1966 Covenant, and you're also the authors of the optional protocol on individual communications. So I hail the initiative of our chairman of having this dialogue with you, which is a very frank and candid one, as you said, Chairman. And during these times, it appears to be absolutely necessary. If I may, I'd like to refer to the aspects related to individual communications, because as you can imagine, this is an extremely important concern for our committee, that is to say, to adopt individual communications. And we've said this on several occasions. This is a very significant part of our identity. There were 2 points which you mentioned, and I'll start out on a positive note, because even though we're going through an exceptional and a structural crisis situation on many fronts, I would like to mention the issue of the harmonization of the working methods as regards individual communications. And then perhaps the Secretariat could add to what I'm going to say about that. This harmonization began with our committee a couple of years ago, formally and informally. We are fully aware that states are parties sometimes to several instruments which may have different procedures in dealing with individual communications. So we are indeed working on harmonization, while of course maintaining the specific characteristic and identity of each treaty body, but to be sure that states reply to the procedural rules in processing individual communications. They need to be as harmonized as possible. This is something that our committee, in any event, has been committed to for 2 or 3 years now, in consultation with other committees who also receive individual communications, and obviously in consultation with the Secretariat. So rest assured on that front. There's no resistance. This was mentioned earlier. We are working on it. Now I'm coming to an issue which is of most concern to us, and many of you have already raised it. This is the backlog in dealing with individual communications. As you know, the Human Rights Committee is the committee that receives the largest number of individual communications, given the fact that the optional protocol dates back to 1966, and also given the very broad scope of rights covered by the 1966 Covenant. Our committee, and I think I can say this, adopts jurisprudence which has authority vis-a-vis the UN family. It's authority that is respected when it comes to civil and political rights, but also the Ambassador of Colombia mentioned climate change on more recent matters and topics. So there I think we can be very proud of our record. However, now this is to do with a structural crisis. We're aware of this, but we're also very much concerned about it. It is obvious that the accumulated backlog in dealing with the complaints we receive infringes not only the effectiveness of our work, as has been said, and this is something that we discuss amongst ourselves, it affects the relevance and legitimacy of the decisions that we can adopt. So we are fully mindful of that. And once again, today's meeting expresses this awareness, the awareness we have in dealing with individual communications and their backlog. And this delay or this backlog is reflected as follows. Once again, this is unprecedented almost. It means that we don't have enough time to meet before the session, as we usually do, to prepare the individual communications. This year, we had a 3-day meeting instead of a full week meeting. So in 3 days, with the best will in the world from colleagues, we cannot undertake the same work. And this delay in dealing with individual communications, and I believe that the Secretariat could come back to this, is down to unprecedented cuts. And this has been what's been announced to us in the coming months will be even worse. Unprecedented cuts in human resources. This is absolutely essential. And I'd like to come back to the proposals put forward. This means that the Secretariat, in dealing with individual communications, has experienced unprecedented crises in terms of stabilizing its staff, its personnel. At the end of this month, I believe that a lot of people are under contract, won't have their contracts renewed. And this is important to be mindful of this. It means that all of the processing in the chain of individual communications is affected. Now, when we talk about a backlog in individual communications, it starts out with the recording of the registration of the communication. There's a delay there because of lack of staff to receive the complaint and to check whether it can be recorded or not. The processing of these complaints once they're recorded, the preparation of draft decisions, and then when the committee has adopted a decision, the follow-up of the decision. And then when it is sent to the state, we need to look at whether the state has implemented the decision in its domestic law. So when we talk about a backlog, it's a backlog that can be reflected across the chain of the individual communications processing. And I think the key problem here, and that's why we're having this meeting today, is one of human resources. And I'd like to reply to the proposal made by Costa Rica. This means that, unfortunately, for our committee, the fact that we can postpone or delay a dialogue and then to release some time to deal with individual communications will not settle the structural problem if we don't have a decision on which ones to work on. So regrettably, the situation is a lot more complicated than that, because we, the members of the committee, need to be able to receive these communications, to be able to adopt them. I think freeing up time in our sessions won't actually settle the problem that we find ourselves in today. Now, my last point, Chairman, without abusing the time given to me, the other problem that we note that really feeds into and worsens the backlog in dealing with individual communications is one of digitalization. This is a long-standing issue. It once again raises structural problems. The system that we members of the committee and the Secretariat work with is a system which is not sufficiently digitalized. And this really leads to significant delays in all of these stages of the procedure when it comes to addressing individual communications. So regrettably, once again, it's a little crude to say it in these terms, but that's the goal of our meeting. Without human, financial, and technological or digital resources which are additional, I feel that the backlog in the individual communications will only further worsen.
Thank you very much, Madam Tigruza. Now I'll give the floor to Mr. Simonovic.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for convening this important meeting, and I thank Secretariat for support in organizing it. Your Excellency, distinguished delegates, thank you very much for being with us here today. We serve you in our expert capacities, and it's good to see that you care and that you appreciate our work. We are encouraged by your presence here and with your discussion. I would just like to echo some points raised by our chair, as well as Madam Vice Chairs. She explained the relevance of the petitions or complaints, individual complaints that we deal with. I would like to emphasize that it's a special feature of this committee and that we receive over half of all complaints or all individual petitions in the treaty body system. And if we are having problems in dealing with them, then of course it's a especially grave problem. I think that Helen explained in details challenges we are facing, especially with a lack of support of Secretariat, which is due to lack of human resources. If they do not prepare cases for us, we cannot work on them and backlog is piling. And austerity measures directly reflect on capacity of Secretariat to prepare cases. Secondly, Helen mentioned pre-session working time, and I would like to be blunt. It's a couple of days ahead of the full committee's meeting where a group of 5 to 6 people meet to facilitate adoption of views by the committee. If we do not have those 5 to 6 days, our deliberations are much less efficient. We lose much more time of the whole committee. So it's cost effective to have those meetings, and it contributes to our efficiency. And of course, has negative impacts on backlog. I would close up by raising up a practical proposal. First of all, we may be wrong, but we consider diplomats in Geneva understanding much better complexities of human rights, of treaty body system, and of our committee. Please do mobilize also your colleagues in New York sitting and communicating with the ACABQ sitting in the 5th committee deciding on financial resources as well as your capitals to support the efficiency of treaty bodies. Secondly, I'm so encouraged by the good outcome of this session that I would like to launch a practical proposal. Traditionally, this committee is meeting with member states to inform them of our work biannually. This is the first time that a special meeting, focused meeting, has been organized because of our request for you to help us and to support us. Based on positive experiences of this meeting so far, and seeing the benefits of direct communication between committee and member states, I think it would be very helpful to have annual meetings to strengthen our direct communication, as well as, if needed, organizing such ad hoc thematic meetings. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Simonovich. Yes, I think his proposal is very excellent. This kind of meeting, as some representatives said, we rely on each other. We are in the same boat. We need to work together. Then we need to work more closely, and particularly in these difficult times. So I think it's a good proposal. Then I will give the floor to Mr. Carajo. Microphone. Mike.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much indeed to representatives of the countries who are with us, the state parties. And as rightly been pointed out, they are the owners of this system, and we turn to them today to request special aid and collaboration, cooperation, as well as special commitments. Now, of course, those of us on this side of the room are speaking in our personal capacities, not on behalf of the committee, because we have taken decisions in that respect. We're here to confirm those commitments and to carry forward our work. Now, in some of the proposals made, we note the importance that we need to continue to give importance and relevance to individual communications and also deal with the backlogs in individual communications by using new technologies. We've been recommended to do so. And now in my own personal capacity, I would like to propose to my colleagues and to the Bureau that we hold the third session using new technologies without any cost from our own homes, from our offices. Of course, we would have to make sacrifices in times of the various time differences. We would have to work during times that we wouldn't usually work during. For that October session, we would have 1 week to prepare in a more reduced working group, and then 3 or 4 weeks of work to hold plenary sessions virtually in October and November. And that decision needs to be taken rapidly so that we can undertake all of the organizational work that will be necessary. We need to be able to face the crisis in terms of mitigation. Yes, this is not a structural solution, but as rightly pointed out by my dear friend, the ambassador of Costa Rica, the conditions that we have experienced and lived through have shown that we need to go slowly, gradually, but take small steps forward. And I'd very much like to thank the ambassador for his reference to our relationship going back several decades now. And this is very much apparent given our age. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Caruso. I'd like to briefly mention about the digitalization and possibility of digital cyber meeting of the committee. We have experience of the online meetings during the pandemic, and we have experienced that the online meetings are not very effective. It's kind of sort of disastrous meetings, not only because of the time difference of different regions, but because of many other reasons. And in chair's meeting in last June, we discussed that matter, and we conclude that that cannot be an option. Of course, we'll have to use digital technologies and AIs, to make our work more effective. But totally having the online, session is not is an ideal option. I want to make it clear. Okay, I want to give the floor to our Vice Chair, Madam Bassim. Madam Bassim, you have the floor.
شكرا سيدي الرئيس.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Allow me at the outset to thank the Secretariat and in particular the member states that attended our meeting today. Your attendance to participate in this dialogue with the Human Rights Committee, despite the fact that the invitation came with a kind of late notification. However, this invitation expresses the interest of member states in the human rights system in general, as well as the treaty bodies and relevant international covenants. The experts members in these committees did not come out of a void. They were appointed as a result of your election, of your vote. You expressed confidence in their ability to fulfill the mandate. A mandate that has been elaborated and adopted by the member states, and the member states themselves are monitoring the implementation of the mandate, and the member states expect from the experts following their meetings and dialogues with the member states to submit a kind of results so that you can so that they can share with you their questions, their concerns, how to overcome some obstacles. And as the previous speakers mentioned, some technical barriers or other barriers and obstacles that the whole UN system is facing, as well as the financial crisis. This dialogue between you and us coincides with the lack of resources faced by the UN human rights system, as well as the lack of confidence from the international community, namely the youth and the young generation. They all question the capacity of our system to fulfill human rights all over the world, given the conflicts at the global level, where we are witnessing the worst abuses and violations of human rights principles and humanitarian law, international humanitarian law. The work of our committee and various treaty bodies, namely our committee, is not limited to examining individual complaints and communications, because these require a particular type of examination by the committee members. As our colleague said, the individual communications need to be examined at an initial step by a small committee. And as you know, they receive a lot of communications. I shall not repeat here the number of communications that your committee receives annually and even on a weekly basis. After examining the individual communications, they are referred to the Human Rights Committee. Such steps require the Human Rights Committee to be very careful in examining the complaints and communications and achieving justice in its decisions. The Human Rights Committee also reviews and monitors the level of commitment of member states towards the ICCPR. The objective is not to level accusations against the member states or to criticize them that will in a manner that will lead to negative results. The objective is to accompany the member states in their journey towards achieving the best implementation of their commitments vis-à-vis the ICCPR. Such reviews include commending the member states for what they achieved, bringing to their attention what has not been achieved so far, and finally to submit recommendations that will help member states to achieve fulfill their commitments to the maximum extent possible. There is another invisible part of the work of the Human Rights Committee: general observations. The world is improving, is developing, and we are witnessing every day new subjects, new thematic approaches that are emerging, such as artificial intelligence, climate change, and others. The committee is examining relevant articles from the ICCPR that are relevant and pertinent, so that they can submit new explanation, new interpretation of accompanying these latest developments and technical and scientific developments, whilst preserving the civil and political rights of human beings. I may have been long in my intervention, but I wanted to refresh the role of our committee in order to bring more transparency, more clarity to those who wonder, what do we do? We need you as member states to support us now the same way you supported us when you chose us, when you voted for us, and the same way you have been supporting us for decades. We are about to celebrate the 60th anniversary of the ICCPR. For the 6 decades, you have been supporting us, and we expect you as fundamental partners to our committee and to the Secretariat and the civil society as well. We expect you to help us in building our capacities and enabling us to achieve the results and to fulfill the mandate you had given us. And thank you for listening to my intervention.
Thank you very much, Madam Basim. Now, last speaker from our members, Mr. Quesada, our Vice Chair.
Gracias, Presidente.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning to one and all. I'd also like to thank the representatives of missions for participating in this informal session. Also, I'd like to thank the state parties for the comments they've made, as well as the support to the treaty body system and, generally speaking, the human rights protection system, which is suffering the effects of the United Nations financial crisis. As has been said, the existence of this committee depends on the state parties to our covenant. The states created this body, convinced of its need to monitor the respect and protection of civil and political rights in particular. That is why this dialogue with you is absolutely vital for the committee. As you are aware, there are 124 state parties to the Covenant and 117 to the Protocol on Individual Communications. This involves an enormous workload for this committee. The appropriate financial resources are essential not only to carry out our ordinary sessions, but also fundamentally so that the Secretariat can have the necessary human resources to provide the committee with the vital technical support and professional support without which we could not function. And this is particularly sensitive when it comes to preparing individual communications. In fact, this situation not only affects our own committee, but also all treaty bodies and the special procedures of the Human Rights Council, as has already been underscored previously in previous statements. But here we address you as representatives of our covenant to request you to study measures and to carry out initiatives which would make it possible to tackle this crisis. The focus in this meeting is based on the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, but in fact the solutions will have to bear in mind that we're party of an overall system and that those solutions must be applied to the entire system. As regards mitigation measures which have been put forward, I think these are interesting. It's interesting to consider them. But our appeal is to seek solutions to this structural crisis, which will occur in the long term, without prejudice to adopting urgent measures, mitigation measures, as has been said. But let me just restate that the approach must be on tackling this crisis structurally. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Quesada. Now I want to give the floor to Secretariat, Madam Monique Lee, to answer to some of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. I believe a number of the questions have been addressed by the members, and there is one outstanding for the Secretariat. And just one point of clarification in addition, in case the representatives, the distinguished representatives, were wondering about the point made by various members about the pre-sessional working group and individual communications. Some of the impact of the reduced meeting time for the treaty bodies have been, before reaching this point of actually canceling whole sessions, there have been in the past some sessions approved but of a reduced duration, and sessions approved without the working groups, whether for communications or for list of issues. And that has been the case for this year. The cancellation of the third sessions included the cancellation of the working groups. The approved second sessions of this year was without those working groups, and that is why that point was made by members. The one question that I believe is outstanding, addressed to the Secretariat, was whether this is a financial crisis or a liquidity crisis. In previous years, we had been speaking about a liquidity crisis, that the dues were expected to come, but they were not coming in time for the organization to continue with all of its mandated work at the time, in a timely manner. That has been, I believe, I don't know if there's an official pronouncement to that effect, but the information that is coming to us, it is not a question of timing anymore. It is not a liquidity issue, but this year we were told that we have been, across the whole organization, but including OHCHR, we have been told that we cannot expect the full budget for this year, that there is a cut, and therefore, I believe this represents a progression from liquidity to a financial crisis. And we are told that next year, the prospects are not likely to improve. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the explanation. Is there anyone from the states or the members who wish to speak in addition? Oh, I give the floor to Dina. I'm sorry.
Thank you very much, Chair. Because a number of questions have been raised with regard to individual communications, I would like to provide you with some information, and first of all, to thank all member states through you for their expressions of support and commitment in this regard. And of course, I would also like to thank all of our experts who have already very much outlined the challenges that the committee is facing with regard to individual communications more specifically. On the question, and thanks to the ambassador of Costa Rica as well, whether we are talking about, a liquidity crisis or whether the challenges faced by the Committee on Individual Communications are of a more structural issue. I would say that the different Secretary General's reports in the past years have outlined that we are talking about a structural problem when it comes to the processing and the decision of individual communications by all the committees, but in particular by the Human Rights Committee, in view of the sheer number of complaints that the committee receives per year. The formula that has been adopted by member states in Resolution 68268 has not been fully implemented with regard to individual communications. And of course, now this situation is being compounded by the liquidity crisis, which has led to significant hiring freezes over the past few years. So we are talking about a very difficult situation for the committee. I would also like to mention that in view of these systemic and structural problems that we are facing, the committee has taken a significant number of steps to address the situation. It is not that nothing has been done over the past years to try to find solutions to a problem which is above the committee to fully address. Mrs. de Groote has mentioned the question of harmonization, and you will see in the most recent conclusions of the chairs as an outline of all the measures that have been taken by the different committees together over the past 3-4 years in trying to align the methods of work on individual communications, which have led for the Secretariat to efficiency gains in terms of how we process and how we deal with individual communications. So this idea of finding cost-saving measures is on our minds all the time, and I think it has allowed the committees to still progress a lot. Last year, the committee has adopted a record number of cases, over 450 decisions on individual communications. This has been due to also introducing new formats that the committee has developed, and I think Spain has made reference to this. And so there is really a lot of thinking going into trying to find solutions. And these measures have also allowed to contain the backlog over the past few years. While we have not been able together to really go towards a reduction, the backlog on individual communications has remained relatively stable. But I'm not saying this to divert from the urgency of the situation, but just to let you know also that a lot is being done in that regard. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I will now several speakers. I'd like to invite the representative for Iran.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Islamic Republic of Iran considers great importance to the treaty bodies as a whole, and the Covenant on the Civil and Political Rights in particular. In this regard, Iran was one of the earliest states that acceded to the Covenant in 1998. By now, Iran has participated 4 times before the ICCPR to present its national developments in implementation of the ICCPR provisions and listen to the recommendations of the committee members. Acknowledging the importance and necessity of the work of all treaty bodies, and including ICCPR, we believe that creative initiatives should be undertaken to improve the functionality of the work of this committee. In this regard, we believe that ICCPR needs to further resort on new technologies and internal virtual meetings for tackling the financial challenges. We still don't have a clear picture that how long this situation will continue, so temporary and long-term solutions should be considered in advance. Regarding the current work of the ICCPR, we have some suggestions that can improve the work of the committee as a whole. Number 1, ICCPR should further consider the cultural diversity and particularities of each country and society in publication of recommendations and concluding observations. Concluding observations must commensurate with requirements of each society and consider challenges that some countries face. For example, not considering challenging issues that some countries face, like terrorism and the unilateral coercive measures, and just pure political recommendations will be considered far from the realities on the ground and even difficult for the concerned countries to fulfill. Countries need to find the work of the committee helpful in promotion and protection of human rights in their societies. Number 2, the committee needs to have further constructive relations with countries in a way that the activities and recommendations don't be considered prejudgment or a kind of political pressure. And number 3, we request the ICCPR to consider publication of a general comment on the impact of unilateral coercive measures on implementation of the recommendations by countries subject to these UCMs. Although UCM impact are mostly considered on economic and cultural rights, but but for sure it has its direct and indirect impact on civil and political rights as well, particularly its impact on increasing opposition groups in targeted countries. Finally, Iran supports the work of the ICCPR and will continue its cooperation with it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your statement. I'll give the floor to representative of France.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, chers membres du...
Thank you very much, Chair. Dear members of the committee, the French delegation would like to thank you for the information shared with us today, which all appears to be important, and we share your legitimate worries and concerns. We recall our commitment supporting the treaty bodies, and particularly the Human Rights Council. The Covenant is one of the pillars of the human rights protection system. Therefore, it is our responsibility as a signatory state to support the actions of this committee charged with implementing the Covenant. I would like to commend your work of extremely high quality that is essential. This has been stated during this very difficult time. We hail your very structured efforts to find more harmonized, effective ways to operate, also using new technologies. This work is essential, and you have our full support. The goal should be to preserve as much as possible the very heart of your mandate, even if we are aware that ultimately this will not be enough to meet the gaps in finance and human resources. But you can count on the support of France to put in place short-term and long-term solutions. I thank you.
Thank you very much. I will give the floor to one of our members, Madame Leinarter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for giving me the floor. And I just wanted to briefly reflect to some calls that came from state parties to look for innovative approaches, innovative methods to human rights treaty bodies. And I wanted just to mention that this is already on the way in the practice. And just to remind you that last April, this year in April, a Committee on Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, the committee initiated its first informal meeting to review Pacific countries' reports, not here in Geneva, but in the region, in Fiji. And the meeting was really very productive, and it has been done with the help of financing from state parties. So maybe it's something that could be reflected by Human Rights Committee, by my committee right now, in the fall, in the absence of money from the budget. And another innovative, most probably method of work was mentioned by the ambassador from Spain, and I think it's really very much important. He mentioned about the necessity of simplified procedures, application of simplified procedures to individual communications. And I think it's indispensable, just because without simplified procedures, I am not sure that it's possible to solve this backlog of individual communications under optional protocol of Human Rights Committee. So thank you very much, and I look forward that state parties could reflect on this possibility that was so much successful by the CEDAW on informal meetings in the regions.
Thank you very much for sharing the case with us. That's a very interesting case. This informal meeting, but it's very productive. They did reviews, state reviews. So I think that's one of the alternatives we can look into. Any members or states? Then probably I will conclude the session meeting with my final remarks. It seems to me, everybody in this room agrees that treaty bodies are at the core of the human rights architecture and extremely important. But the fact is that we're not going to have the session in October. It is cancelled. Without extraordinary measures, it is not going to happen. But even worse, the future doesn't look very good. This trend will continue if we rely on the regular budget of the United Nations. Now, there is a regular budget reduction in the United Nations, a crisis of United Nations, but there's another step. The United Nations, however, the regular budget reduces, is allocate the money to OHCHR. As you know, less than 5% of UN regular budget is allocated to the human rights bodies. That's the second problem. Then third problem is when OHCHR receives the allocated funding, they allocate to the treaty bodies, which is continue to reduce. Even if everybody says that it's a core of human rights bodies, core of the United Nations, but we are not receiving enough funding for our core work. So, we, our members, are doing our best. We do, believe me, in terms of rationalization, harmonization, simplification, digitalization, we are seeking for every possibility we can do, contribute to our work. But we still need adequate support from the Secretariat. I want to emphasize this point. Secretary carry out our work. Without Secretariats, we cannot conduct our mandate. As allocated resources decline, support diminishes, creating vicious cycle. Fewer steps lead to less work, which lead to less meeting time, which in turn result in further reduction of staff and funding. We really need special measures. One possible step we discussed today is to utilize voluntary contributions properly and transparently. But what is clear is this: without functioning treaty bodies, the world will become more dangerous, and human rights situations will continue to deteriorate. All of us in this room don't want to have this happen. We must act decisively and urgently to safeguard the treaty body system and vital role it plays in protecting human rights. So with that saying, I want to conclude the meeting, and thank you very much for your participation, and I look forward to working more closely with you. The meeting is adjourned.